In this video, we're going to take a look at a blue ink by KWZ Azure #1. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. Also, down in the description is a link to the blue ink playlist, so if you want to see more, you can find that there. I'm an ink guy, and let's get into the first writing sample done on 90 GSM Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. We have no feather, no spread. We do get shading a little bit in the stub, quite a bit better in the extra fine. Not tons, but it does show up in the medium. Now, the extra fine took 17 seconds to dry, and the medium took 22. The scrubby for both do show a little bit of color variation, but it shows up much better in the extra fine writing. The smear test says you could likely recover if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then a Viscosity Medici with a broad nib was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. The next writing sample is done on 52 GSM Tomoe River. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, spread, halo sheen. We get no shading in the stub. That's much darker than everything on the page. The extra fine that is much lighter than the stub does show some bits of shading throughout. Pretty nice. The medium is darker than the extra fine, not as dark as the stub, but it doesn't really show any shading. The extra fine took 24 seconds to dry, while medium took 34. Scrubby for both don't show a ton of color variation, but it does show itself in the extra fine writing, and the smear test you probably could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down, and then it's put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we do see that this blue is moving up, and it's almost, it's going down fairly uniform. There is some darker streaking. It means that it's sort of bonding a little bit as it's moving. But across the top, we see a much lighter blue as the darker blue stops, showing that it's actually two shades of blue being mixed. The one on the right is allowed to dry for 10 minutes, and you see that the darker blue has more stayed in the line, showing that that might be a little bit more of a resistant tone. That very light blue still manages to show itself at the very top. The next writing sample is done on 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. No bleeding, no ghosting. Now we get no feather and no spread in the writing. The extra fine is a lot lighter than the stub. The medium's darker than the extra fine, but still quite a bit lighter than the stub. We get no shading in the stub. We do get it in the extra fine, and we get little bits of it in the medium. It does show itself. The extra fine took 19 seconds to dry, while the medium took 26. The scrubby for both show a little bit of color variation, far left to far right. It shows up better in the writing, best in the extra fine. Smear test says you stand a chance of recovery if you smear while you're writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink could be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I would not use this in a note-taking situation because we're losing a lot of it. Now, water's lifting a lot of the darker tones, still leaving a lot of the lighter tones. It's not really showing the white of the paper coming through, where pen flush is starting to show some of the white of the paper coming through, so it's breaking it down much faster, though not completely. But it did only take water to get this out of my pen. The 1/3 bleach solution is completely removing it from the page and discoloring the edges just a little bit. The next writing sample is done on yellow Rhodia paper. We do this not to see any kind of performance change, but to really see tone change that goes on. And while we have a blue on white paper, we definitely get a very green-leaning turquoise on the yellow paper. Now, this may matter to you if you work in a professional environment where you write on yellow paper. Things to be aware of. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. KWZ's Azure #1 has a viscosity of 2.01, meaning it's just a little bit wetter than normal. If you're interested in how the viscosity is tested and the bell curves made and all of that kind of stuff, then down in the description is a link to that video. Now, let's take a look at life paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub, that's the darkest tone. We do get shading in the extra fine, just as we always have. And the medium, not a whole lot of shading, but there are a few spots that show themselves lighter than this very dark writing. Now it's very dark as in it's much darker than the extra fine, but it is a little lighter than the stub. Extra fine took 16 seconds to dry and the medium took 23. Scrubby for both do show some color variation, and it's definitely there in the writing, though better in the extra fine. And the smear test you could likely recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time was 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. KWZ's Azure has an average dry time of 24 seconds, so it takes a little longer than normal to dry. The last writing sample is done on Apica CD paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. We have no feather, spread, halo sheen. We don't get any shading in the stub, which we haven't. The extra fine still shows very good shading throughout all of it. The medium shows, again, little spots of it. More of the little spots are lighter areas, like the F in Fox or the W in Brown. The extra fine took 12 seconds to dry, while the medium took 17. Scrubby for both show only a little bit of color variation, as it shows much better in the extra fine writing. And the smear test I do not think you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Instead of finding inks that look like KWZ's Azure No. 1, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I decided to go with a brown ink by Tag Kayo their Stone Road of Gion. Now, if you'd prefer a different complement color, then down in the description are links to those playlists. So what do I think of KWZ's Azure No. 1? The writing sample is much lighter than what I'm getting here. It gives shading and isn't too light to comfortably read, which I actually thought it would be, but it does look like it's faded a bit as a blue. So what nib and pen are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? If you don't mind the lighter tone and really want to bring out that shading, then a medium flow fine really gave that best performance. But if what you want is its darker tone, then you want to use a wetter pen like what you were seeing in the stub in the writing samples. I hope you got something out of this video, and in the next video we're going to take a look at Pilot Mixable Red.